for the 2015 inductee to the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Hall of Fame, Michael Paul Gibson from Dallas, Texas. And Mike, and tomorrow you'll be joining your friends and fellow lawyers from the North Texas area, Mike High School and Jeff Kearney, and becoming the newest members of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Hall of Fame. And it is such a well-deserved honor, not only for our association, but also I know for you and your family it is, because you have had such a distinguished career, and we're going to spend some time going over that, okay? And so the first thing I think that people would like to know is, when is it that you first decided you wanted to become a lawyer?
Well, that's an interesting question, but first of all, I do want to thank you for coming, Richard, and participating in this interview. I want to thank the members of TCDLA. I was humbled and surprised when I got the call that I was going to be asked to do it. And it means a lot to me because I have been a member since 1974. And some people important to me signed my certificate. So thank you for coming, and thank the members of TCDLA for this honor, because I'm very humbled and proud to take it. When did I want to, or decide or understand to become a lawyer? Actually, like most people, I think you fall into your careers, but in my case, I can even remember a seminal moment when I thought that might be what it is, although I received some guidance. But I had graduated from college, and I had declined the medical school and went to dental school in Houston, Texas, and I was working in a hospital, and I did not enjoy dental school. It wasn't the grades, it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And interestingly enough, the pathologist doctor that I worked for at St. Luke's Hospital, which is in Houston, Texas, was a lawyer who became a doctor and was dissatisfied with it. And in a moment of discussion with him about how I just was struggling with it, he said, "Well, Mike, you always like to argue with me. You always take up for everybody else around here." He says, "Why don't you get the heck out of dental school, and why don't you go to law school?" And so I really did take his advice. That kind of brought it crystal, and I eventually finished 2 years of dental school, withdrew, taught school for a year in Houston, and waited and made my application to law school, and went to SMU in 1968, late 68.
And so, which brings an interesting question. You've had kind of a checkered job past that kind of led you to this particular moment. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you did before you went to law school?
Well, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, with wonderful parents, and I have my older sister. I went to Lanier Catholic High School and graduated, and went to Texas Wesleyan College, which is a small Methodist college there in Fort Worth. I tell my good friends from TCU I wanted to go, but I couldn't pay the rate at TCU. Big TCU fan today.
Of course, the rate back then was like $400 a semester.
It was pretty low. I think ours was like $8 an hour per semester. So it's just, yes, that's how old we are. However, I did enjoy science. In fact, I have a degree in chemistry, and so I got into working in the hospital laboratories. That's how I got working in it. And at the same time of working in laboratories to go to school, I was active in politics. I did like politics. I did some work in Austin. I did some work for some Congress people in Fort Worth, Jim Wright, in his office and things. So I was always busy, and I got an opportunity to go to medical school that I declined, and bless my dear departed mother's heart, it probably broke her heart. But that was a decision I made, and I went to dental school and thought that was right. I had gotten married and packed up and drove to Houston with no place to be and no job, and there we go. And so I was working, and that was another really great blessing to me in many respects. While in Houston, I worked at St. Luke's Hospital. At St. Luke's Hospital today is the Denton Cooley Heart Hospital in Houston, and so I got an opportunity to not only meet with Dr. Denton Cooley and Dr. DeBakey at a time when the transplant programs were going on, but I actually got to participate in Dr. Cooley's first transplant that he did at St. Luke's Hospital in the Heart Center there, and just am amazed and just enthralled with the intelligence and dedication and hard work of those people. It convinced me I made the right decision not to be a doctor, because it is incredibly long hours of difficult work. But that from that time, it was a very, very big blessing. Dental school, although, like I said, I just did not like it. It was not. I should not have done it, and so I did take those words to heart and started the application process. I knew I was going to have to be a year or two out, and so I taught school at the Houston Independent School District Junior High School in Bel Air, Texas, for a year. And
one particular grade, or did you have a particular subject?
well, it was interesting. I taught science, not surprisingly, since I had a little bit of medical background and degree. But I taught physical science and biology, and I did have a checkered career there, because I was the only. First of all, this was back when we were waiting, and I was waiting to get drafted potentially too. But the Vietnam War was on, and so I was the only male in the science wing. The other teachers either had been drafted or joined the Army. And so two things were interesting about it. One, eventually within 6 weeks, all of the miscontents in the other classes seemed to be transferred into mine. And so I had some kids that were challenging. But the second thing, not being a teacher by training and really enjoying it, by the way, really enjoying it. I would teach biology, and I would do things, bring things from work, because I worked a second job, and I worked another job in the hospital. And so whenever we would study the heart, heck, I'd go bring the heart in. I had access to it. I was called to the principal's office a few times and told to follow the rules. And I tried to explain I am following them, but I have the kids, and the kids loved it, you know. And so then I brought some other body parts or other things in, and had to go down to the administration downtown. And I learned that, like, you know, what I should do. I stopped and said, okay. But I knew, one, I didn't want to be a teacher, because that's what's part about it. And so I had a checkered career there, but I met some great kids. It was a good experience, and it gave me some insight into teachers and the hard work those teachers had down there.
So did teaching teenagers allow you some skills that you use for clients later on in your practice? A
little bit, it did. It learned to be patient and learned to be understanding, and as I've later learned down the road, learned to plant some seeds to some things. But then I got accepted to a couple of law schools. I think Houston, and I think South Texas, and SMU. And our families were from Dallas-Fort Worth at the time, and my first son, Jason, was going to be born, and was born in Houston as we went up to SMU. And so I enrolled in SMU and went to work at a hospital there, and graduated as quickly as I could, since I'd had this path to try to get into out of law school.
Was there any particular time during your time at SMU, was there any particular thing that got you interested in criminal law?
Yes and no. In my earlier life and in some of the work I did in politics, I knew some of the criminal lawyers in Fort Worth. And
talk to us about some of those.
And I knew Judge Byron Matthews really well, and it was just interesting. He was just a raconteur type fellow with interesting things to say and do. And Randall Riley is another lawyer from Fort Worth, and so I just thought they seemed to do a lot of trial work, and they did a lot of interesting things. So I had that in my background, and now at SMU we didn't have a lot of trial advocacy classes and anything to really expose you to it, but I just felt like that's what I wanted to do. I like to be on my feet talking to people and helping people in trouble, and that's how I thought I wanted to do criminal law. And upon graduation, back then, if you wanted to do criminal law in the Dallas area or the Fort Worth area, you went and worked to the district attorney's office.
And that was going to be in 1971?
That was going to be in 1970. Well, I graduated in December of 1970 and then took the bar in 71, I believe.
So wanting to work in the criminal law field, did you follow the advice and the path that so many people had taken and go sit outside Henry Wade's door and wait for an interview?
Well, that's exactly right. I did. I did go out and sit in front of his door. I met with his secretary, Miss Pat Revel, who guarded the door as any good assistant would do, and came back 2 or 3 different times and waited, and he finally, she came out and said, go down and see Mr. Mulder. And so I went down and met and introduced myself to Doug Mulder. He was the first assistant at that time, and I didn't know whether, it wasn't really a formal interview, but I felt like we got along okay, and came back, and she came out and said, Mr. Wade, we'll see you. And I walked in and had a brief conversation with him, and he's somebody. There are 2 people who affected my legal career the most, and one of them had to be Henry Wade. Regardless of what you may say about him today, he was a fine man who gave me my first job in law and gave me the opportunity to build a career, and for that I will forever be thankful.
Tell us about your time in prosecuting for Henry Wade and the people you got to meet and things like that that were later on either important to you at the time or became more important later on.
Well, it was an important time. It was a smaller group of people. That's the thing that was very good. Mr. Wade was even nice enough to hire me in the appellate section while we were waiting for the bar results, so I could help research and write briefs. And that's where I met several longtime friends of mine today. Mike McCullum, who you know very well, had just been brought on board there and was working in the appellate section. Bob Baskett, who you worked with, he and I became partners at one time, and he still practices criminal law. I met there, and Colonel Westmoreland, who has since passed, was in charge of it, and so on. And then Richard helped me here, the young man, Nelms.
John Nelms?
John Nelms.
What about Kerry Fitzgerald?
Kerry Fitzgerald was not there.
Okay.
He had already moved on out. And so I had some great friends and mentors there and wrote some briefs, and then I got the call, or somehow I found out that the bar results were out, and by the skin of my teeth, I guess, I got through the door and was licensed. And the interesting thing that I'll always remember about that is Jerry Banks, who is a lawyer here today, and Don Horton, we became pretty good friends, and they came up and said, listen, let's go get you sworn in. You go try a case this afternoon. And so I literally left the 7th floor of the DA's office and went and Judge John Vance swore me in. And at 1:30, I was in Ben Ellis's court, Judge Ellis's court, trying to pick a jury, having no idea what I was doing.
Your first trial was in Judge Ben Ellis's court?
In Ben Ellis's court, it was.
And for those people who don't know, Judge Ben Ellis is known as being the most even-tempered judge that ever practiced on the bench. He was mad all the time.
Exactly. He was.
And so you that basically you got your baptism of fire the same day that you were licensed.
I did. And if you talk about learning to think on your feet, that's where you did. Now, I didn't think well on my feet. I need to go ahead and say this because it was kind of interesting. And they still remember it today. I actually saw Jerry Banks at Bill Alexander's funeral here the other day. I'm in there trying this case, and I'm not doing a real good job. We've got a jury, and Don Hart was second chairing me, and he keeps telling, at the break, he keeps telling Jerry, we're going to lose this case. We're going to lose this case. So I finished with the witnesses that I was supposed to have, and Don Hart said, why don't you call the defendant? Because that way it'll cover some of the things you haven't done. And without thinking, I stood up in front of Ben Ellis and said, well, Your Honor, we'll call Joe Smith, the defendant, for the prosecution to the stand. And I look at the little doorway where we used to go out to court, and Jerry Banks, and Don Harden, and I think Steve Tokley was standing there laughing and just about to die. Well, Judge Ellis turned the color of this tablecloth. You could see his veins coming up. He asked Mr. Bailey to excuse the jury, and he brought me up there and shut the door, and the rest will never be told. We're about never do that again. But it didn't even, that just turned into a disaster, but it did a number of things. He and I became very good friends because I did prosecute in his court, and you learn He was a tremendous teacher. And if you would listen to what he did, he knew how and what to do as there. And secondly, I learned to learn, even though on your feet, you need to learn to think, not just react. And I hopefully have done that over the years. That was my first trial as a Dallas County Assistant District Attorney.
Let's talk about how long did you stay at the DA?
I did not stay very long. I stayed about 19 to 20 months, really, but it was a good time. We in Judge Ellis's court, you tried to a jury 2 to 3 cases a week. I got to a felony court. I along with John Sparling and Don Driscoll, both gentlemen you know, were assigned to these, at that time were called impact courts. They were created by the legislature to get rid of the backlog of cases because the trial courts were so full. And so I got to felony court and tried felonies 2 a week. And so really got a blessed induction into trying cases with John Sparling, who became an associate justice of the Court of Appeals and good judge, and Don Driscoll and other good lawyers. So at some point in time, I had pretty much tried everything, maybe but capital murder cases. And I was still working a job, but I still continued to work after nights and weekends at the hospital. I had a Presbyterian hospital. And so I was never home. I was never home, and it was always a struggle. And so the decision, I began to think about leaving, even though you generally think you're going to stay there 3, 4, 5 years. And at one point in time, I had a case and where I met Mr. Phil Burleson and his partner at the time, Jay Mills. And I was just immediately impressed with Phil Burleson. Just a gentleman, thoughtful, respectful, tough lawyer. And it was a misdemeanor case, but it had to do with some alleged member of the Marcellus crowd from New Orleans and being in the Lemon Twist bar with a gun or something like that. All over. And so we actually got to try that case and then worked it out before it went to work. But I got to meet him. I met Phil and Jay Mills. And a couple of 3 weeks later, Jay Mills came down and says, whenever you leave, you ought to come up and talk to Phil. He was pleased and thought you did a good job.
For those people who may not know, Phil Burleson, not only the namesake of the law firm, Burleson, Payton, Gibson, but also was a past president of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, past president of the State Bar. He did not have to take
He didn't. He was going to run that year.
Right.
Bob Davis ended up having to run.
And is also a member of the Hall of Fame. So
yes.
It is quite a special occasion when you're to join your mentor in the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Hall of Fame. Tell us about Phil.
Well, he is the other most significant person that affected me professionally and personally. And Phil just was my grandfather mentor. I mean, I had a grandfather who I loved very much and mentored me when I was a young man. But Phil is who I learned under and trained under and got to see and talk to and learn things from. And he died way too young in 1995. And there's it's a shame that he couldn't continue on. I enjoyed practicing law with him. I trusted him completely in things that he did, and it's as a result really of him that I'm lucky enough to be in the position to have a career where I would maybe have an opportunity to be in the Hall of Fame, because early on it was his relationships and cases that I helped him on, and I became his right-hand man, that I was able to participate in and be involved in some pretty significant cases.
Well, let's talk about some of those cases right now. I want to talk about the cases that you tried with Phil, and then we're going to move on a little bit for that the cases that after Phil was gone. But let's talk about those cases that you tried with Phil. Obviously, one that most of the people are going to know about were the 2 or 3 Cullen Davis cases.
Right.
Talk about those.
I will. First of all, Phil was a little bit like the prosecutors, because he was a prosecutor. He worked at the court. He was clerk at the Court of Criminal Appeals. He was a prosecutor in Henry Wade's office. His history, and people need to know, he was the only lawyer hired by Jack Ruby the alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, who remained his lawyer until the end. And we have in our office a picture of Phil walking Jack Ruby's widow out of the jail when they had pronounced him dead. And he stood by that man tooth and nail. And that is a character trait that I learned from him and that saw in him that made it the right decision to go and associate with him and try cases. He was dogged and dedicated and would work for the person accused. When I came to work there and joined those offices, he and Jay were in the middle of a 12-year battle on a guy named Hackthorne, J.D. Hackthorne, who had received the death penalty. And they had taken up writs and appeals, and he had, it took 14 years, but the writ was granted, the death penalty was taken off, and he was just able to plead to life, and they saved his life. It took 14 years, that's how and they worked it and worked it and worked it. So that's one of the traits that I saw in him and picked up in him. The second thing is like this. He said to me when we came up, and he said, well, you got to pay rent. And, you know, I'm not hiring you. You got to pay rent. I think I paid $100 a month to rent up there. And he said, we'll teach you, but you got to go learn on your own. And I said, I will. I'm eager. And the first case I did for Phil, I got in a car and drove to Abilene, Texas, and met with Judge Leo Brewster from Fort Worth in a drug case involving students at TCU in a federal court that I'd never been in. And I was there all by myself because Phil was occupied with something else. And met some great people out in Lubbock. But the reason we were in Lubbock is Judge Brewster, it was September, so he wanted to go dove hunting. So he moved his docket out there. So Phil didn't mind just tossing you out there and saying, go find your wings, and you did. One of the very first cases that I did with Phil, another quality case that I'd rather talk about first, and then Cullen Davis, because it's kind of a notorious case and a case that brings a lot of emotions to people. But Phil and I and the other lawyers in the firm had represented law enforcement in their business organizations, trying to get them, rules of regulations on firing and termination. Very close association in helping form the DPA, Dallas Police Association. And so we were called, both he and I, but he was called to represent a police officer by the name of Darrell Kane. I'm going to talk a little bit about this tomorrow, but Darrell Kane was a police officer who was accused of killing a 12-year-old boy from the backseat of a car, playing Russian roulette with him. And it's a terrible tragedy. And it created, as you know, a lot of business and nightmares for the city of Dallas. And there's just no excuse for it. But Darrell King was our client and our officer. And so Phil and I got there, and he took Darrell King went with Darrell King to jail, where Darrell was fired and ordered to take his uniform off and walk out to the press in his underwear by the chief of police. And Phil Burleson took his clothes off and gave him his clothes, and Phil walked out in a raincoat. He said, I would never let you humiliate my client. Amazing in the Strand. And we did come to Austin and try that case and together, and Doug Muller was on the other side. Some of the people I prosecuted with were on the other side, and Cecil Emerson, and it was a hard case. Betty Blackwell's dad, Judge Blackwell, was the presiding judge here in Austin, and he was found guilty, but he got a 5-year sentence, which was kind of what we were hoping for. So that was the first case, and really an emotional, hard case. But then,
and I was on the other side of it because I was representing a lot of the people who were charged with rioting as a result of the death of Santos Rodriguez.
And I think that was your first time to meet and work with Richard Haynes.
It was, yeah.
Haynes. And so after that, I then had probably the most significant, well, not the most significant, but equally significant case of my life, and that was the involvement to represent Cullen Davis. And when I look at those pictures and look at how young I was at 31 or 32 or whatever, but he was charged with murder, killing his soon-to-be ex-wife's boyfriend and 12-year-old daughter, over in Fort Worth. There was a man in the wig, and she identified Cullen Davis. We had actually 4 trials, but 3 trials. Phil and I represented him in habeas hearing to get his bond reduced and in Fort Worth, and then the decision was made to bring in another lawyer, and that's where we got the opportunity to bring and meet. And I got to meet Richard Haynes. And so with another team of lawyers, including Steve Sumner and Sam Giberson, we became a kind of band of gypsies because they started to try. We started to pick a jury in Dallas, Fort Worth, in front of Judge, I think, Tom Cave, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I'm old enough to forget. But we couldn't get a jury that was either one side or the other. They were very well high-profile social people in that community. So it was not going to get a jury. And so fairly quickly, we got transferred and changed the venue to Amarillo, Texas, which was an amazing benefit to Cullen Davis and an event for us. And so the first murder trial took place in Amarillo, Texas, in front of Honorable George Dallin, whose stepson, actually works in our office, Trey Bunch, and his George's wife, and he's passed away. But he was a great judge, just a fair judge, a great judge, but he was enamored with Richard Haynes. And so it was always something to do with Mr. Haynes, this, race that. And but I will tell everybody, and I'll tell it again, that great Richard Haynes, the third most important person in my life in respect professionally, is to have the time to spend with Richard Haynes. He is the best trial lawyer I can imagine in the world. And it isn't just his instincts and his skills. When the bell rings, he works harder than anybody. But when the bell's not ringing, he can party pretty hard and wear you down. So we did try Cullen Davis and got an acquittal after a 4.5 to 5 month trial in November of 1975, I believe. We thought that was it. We'd won, and we were heroes, and we all come back to home and try to reestablish our practice. And August of '76, I believe, we get a phone call, and Cullen Davis is back in jail. And so I think Phil and I both, I don't think Mr. Haynes Race got up there, but we go to Fort Worth, and he's accused of hiring a hitman to kill the judge in his still continuing divorce case. And the hitman was a guy named David McCrory, who had a relationship with Priscilla Davis, who was the ex-wife. Anyway, it's another bombshell. But the difference is this: the judge didn't get shot. It was a setup, a sting. But the case, he got held in jail, no bond. They sought the death penalty again. The first one was a capital case too. So he stayed in jail in Amarillo, and he stayed in jail in Houston. But the statutes and laws at the time required a 60-day start of trial if everybody would agree to it, to go, or the state wanted it to go to trial. And so within 60 days, we were in front of was it Judge Gray? Judge Gray, Gordon Gray, down in Houston, trying a capital murder case for solicitation of capital murder. And you talk about scrambling. The evidence and the facts are in Fort Worth. We're in Harris County. And Steve Sumner, who was a lawyer in our office and really was kind of the big lead investigator, and Kent Schaefer, that's how we met Randy and Kent Schaefer. We hired Haynes and Kent Schaefer come in as investigator. They were literally leaving at night and driving or flying to Fort Worth and Dallas trying to find witnesses and bring things down. And we were it was just pure defense mode, to try to combat this thing. And there were times in there, the quote I always remember Haynes told me. He leaned over one day, and it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, "We don't have any more witnesses. Go up to jail and find somebody and bring them down." And I said, "Well, Race, I can't do that." "Well, find somebody." And I said, and so I went and got somebody, and we subpoenaed somebody. I don't even remember the name. Then I came back and said, "What are you going to ask me?" "I don't know, but give me a menu from a restaurant, and I'll talk till 5 o'clock because we got to get to 5 o'clock." And sure enough, at 5 o'clock, there's some prisoner there who has no idea what he's doing. Doesn't know anything about this case. And the judge goes, all right, that's enough. We're done. We made it to 5 o'clock. So that's how the term made it to 5 o'clock came up to me. We tried that case and got a hung jury. I believe it was 8-6 for guilty. I mean, and that's a huge win because we really had no time to prepare at all. And a third trial then was transferred back up to Fort Worth. The feeling was that it died down, although that was a tragic mistake by the DA's office to let it get back to Fort Worth. And we tried that case again in Fort Worth, the solicitation case, and he was acquitted. And so that was the sabbatical of Cullen Davis. Just a marvelous learning experience. I would when Priscilla Davis was on the stand for, I think, 14 days in trial in Amarillo, I would get daily copy, and I would get it at 8 o'clock, and I would outline it for race, and I had to meet him at 10. He would read it from 10 to 12, and at 12 o'clock, he and I would go walking in the parking lot of the apartments, and he would want to talk with me about what he was going to do the next day. And then so we'd get to bed at 1 or 2 o'clock and back up, and sure enough, that he would go up there, and he literally just worked some magic, just magic.
Amazing to work with a lawyer who has almost a photographic memory.
Exactly. And the other part about that case, from Phil's standpoint, I mean, is that one of his talents is he never stops thinking. And from the very beginning of my career with Phil, I would see him late at night drinking of Seagrams and Seven and writing to-do lists. And it's a sorry thing that we didn't save all those, especially from Cullen Davis, because he would write 50, 60 things a night new to do to try to help the case. He never quit thinking. And that's another trait that was just pretty impressive.
And so here you are, you're 30, 31 years old, and you're trying cases, major cases, with folks who have been trying cases for a number of years.
Exactly. So what a gift, what a blessing I've received, and got educated that way. But it just was wonderful. And the one thing you always have to learn, and I'm sure lawyers who read this will recognize that, you always watched people try cases. Charlie Tessmer, used to go watch the great Charles Tessmer, a member of our organization, watch try cases. But when I first finished up with the Cullen Davis cases, when I had my first trials, I don't remember what it was, I would try to be Richard Haynes. Well, I'm not Richard Haynes. There's only one of him, one race. And so you learn, listen, you need to be yourself, and you need to develop your own set of skills and things, and that was a good lesson for me to learn.
Let's talk about some of the other trials that you had prior to the time in 1995 when we lost Phil. Talk about some of the other trials that meant a lot to you, and what did they mean to you?
Well, I had some interesting trials in after Cullen Davis that were meant a lot to me, from me growing as a lawyer. I hoped that I would grow as a lawyer. I had a case involving that occurred in 1982 called the Tammy Bird case. This was a lady who was charged with killing her husband while he was in bed. And about that time, the movie Burning Bed with Farrah Fawcett was in vogue there, and so I was hired to I was hired. It was my case. So they came and hired me. I don't know why, except she was from Amarillo or outside of it. She was from Dumas. And I took over that case, and it was a difficult case because she did shoot him. He didn't have a weapon. He was laying in bed. But I learned more than I would ever think I should learn about forensics and blood spatter patterns from Dr. Stone. And we were able to show with his testimony that the droplets on the bed, there were a number of droplets that were circular, like this glass, on the bed pillow. And that was indicative of the head coming up because of the way the blood would drop and the importance of that. And that was the other thing I learned. And I'm very, very against domestic violence. But I learned a lot in that case about the psychological effects that women can't leave, that they psychologically and psychiatrically just can't leave. Just like this poor, she was treated, I don't want to describe on this, the horrible treatment by her husband. But the droplet was important because we, for the first time, got to charge on self-defense, if she believed she was getting ready to get beat and raped by coming in that room, and he was going to come after her, and she shot him. And the droplets had him coming out of bed. And the other thing that I did is I brought the bed to the courtroom. And I said, there it is. And boy, those juries looked on it. And so that was really, and we got acquitted. She got to go home and was found not guilty. Big case for me, big important case. We did it right. And then after that, a couple of other cases that we did were important. But then in 1984, I got the second biggest case of my life that has two very important things happen. I have some good friends that are lawyers in Mesquite named Charlie Schuenberg and what's his name? Gosh almighty. Gary Grimes, I apologize. Gary Grimes, who had been representing a man named Henry Kyle, and I got a call one afternoon, and he called and said, we're in Los Angeles. Henry Kyle's son is in jail and he killed him, or he's accused of killing him. You got to come help us. And my wife would appreciate this statement. I said, his brother's there, is in jail too. And I said, well, which one's in the most trouble? And he said, well, Ricky, because he had a gun. And so we hopped a plane and flew out there, and he was in the hospital wounded, and I represented Ricky Kyle in that case. And it was a fascinating case. And then Ron Goranson and Mr. Milner, George Milner Sr., and Frank Wright represented the son. And you got to come out and watch us do some work there also.
All the witnesses were back in Dallas-Fort Worth.
Right. Most all of them. And so that went on. It was in 1984. It was tried starting in October of 1985, right? And that became the longest case I've ever been in, even over the Cullen Davis case. We didn't get a decision from a jury or the court until April of the next year. And I had judges calling me from Dallas, especially Judge Barefoot Sanders, who was a dear friend of mine. He would have Phyllis call me and say, Mike, you got a case set here in December. When are you going to be done? And I would say, Phyllis, they're still calling witnesses and we're still having these hearings. And I don't think so. And finally he called me in January and he said, here's the order. You are ordered to, when the jury goes out, ordered to come to Dallas and try this case. That's been said, I forget the case. I think it's a Camden case, I'm not sure. And along that way, he said, and that's the order. And he sent an order to me saying that. And so when the jury went out in April, and they deliberated over 20 days, I came back to Dallas with the jury out, tried a federal case in front of Judge Sanders, and had another jury out at the same time. And I told him, and then I said, okay, Judge, which door, when it knocks, do I get to go answer? And he said, you're here. You're not answering the one in California. And so I was not, what happened is the court granted a hung jury. I tried that case and got a hung jury, 10-2 for guilty. And they declared a mistrial. Steve Sumner and John Vandevelde, our local lawyer, had to get it. So that was the most significant trial again that I ever had in my own. And there's two things that came out of it: meeting some good friends, and as that trial allowed me to meet my blessed and wonderful wife, who I have been married to for 25 years. And that was the better part of that trial, without question, no question.
So there are some good things that happen in California.
There are some good things that happen in California. We got some good daughters and grandkids out there, but it was a pretty amazing trial, and I did not go back for the retrial or anything. I think he ended up getting a manslaughter charge and 5 years in prison. But I could spend way too long talking about that. That's where the L.A. police released the physical evidence to us, and we put the doors, and we rebuilt the room where the event happened in the courtroom, and did some just crazy stuff.
Talk about some of and you talked about how that case influenced you as a lawyer in the future. Talk about some of the cases that have happened since then and how you used some of those lessons that you've learned from Cullen Davis and from Racehorse Haynes and from Phil in cases in the future that you tried.
Well, we did have some very good, interesting cases afterwards. After that case, I kind of made the decision to be more focused on federal practice. I had done federal practice. My first trial was a federal trial, and I thought that I could bring some trial skills that I didn't see in the federal arena, from work and trying these tough murder cases there. And so I began to focus on more business and federal practice, and we had a trial that involved the charge of fraud, DISD foreman and an owner of a construction company built the Frank Wright building out in South Dallas that you know about, was accused of stealing $500 to $1 million in building that contract. And so he was charged, another administrator was charged, and the architect was charged. And we had a trial on that, and that trial was interesting. And great lawyers from Dallas, some that y'all will know. Frank Jackson represented the architect. Billy Ravkin, good Billy, represented the administrator that my client, and I represented the man who got all the money and was involved in the conspiracy. And so we tried that to a jury, and were acquitted. All three of us were acquitted. It was a big headline in Dallas how they got acquitted. The interesting story that I'll tell tomorrow is Frank's client, probably Jackson, who I respect and care for, a dear friend, should never have been even in the case. He asked hardly any, if no, questions. So we're all congratulating our families, and we're all happy about the verdict, and we look around and we can't find Frank. So we walk out of the federal courthouse anticipating some publicity from it because it was highly covered. And over at the Dolphus Hotel, Frank was already there telling the Dallas Morning News and Channel 5 how he just kicked the you-know-what out of the federal government. And I looked at Billy and I said, Billy, did he ask any questions? He didn't make a final argument. So I've always gigged him about that. We got no publicity at all much. But it was a big case, an important case, and I think I learned, that was a case where I think some of the skills that I'd been developing, did help and did help us do some good. And then a case I'm going to talk about tomorrow wasn't really a trial, but it's about the doggedness that Phil instilled in me, and that was always look at every piece of paper in the case. Always try to talk to every witness. Always try to do it. But we had a lady named Jane Metters Cook, who, along with her brother and an acquaintance, were charged with stealing or conspiring to steal World War II relics from the Quedlinburg monastery in Germany. Their older brother had served in World War II and was in charge of the Allied invasion force keeping safe the treasures that had been hidden in these caves and deals. And apparently over that period of time, Joe Metters packed up and shipped back to the States millions of dollars of artifacts and relics from that location. They lived in White Rock, Texas. He died intestate. Families took this stuff. They thought it was in a warehouse. They really didn't know the value of it. And then after about 1988, 89, they were on hard times financially a little bit. So they said, why don't we try to sell some of this stuff that Joe had sent over? And unbeknownst to them, in a parallel track, investigators had been trying to track it down and trace it down. And an investigator had been in White Rock, Texas, at the Exxon station in White Rock, Texas, and saw a cigar box sitting on the counter, holding stubs or receipts. And he looked at it and he says, that's from Quedlinburg, Germany. And so they were already investigating. They got charged with conspiracy to possession of stolen property. And the property did get returned, and most of it all that hadn't already been sold got back. But what was interesting about that is the investigation had taken so long, and they had to get letters rotatory to get records and things like that. The indictment comes, and we're working on trial. Dick DeGuerin represented the other brother, and another Hall of Famer, an outstanding lawyer from Houston, and I enjoyed working with him. But we kept thinking, and I kept thinking, that there's something about the search warrants and the letters rogatory and things like that that just didn't match up. And so I pulled all the paper out, and I remember the night I was up in our office in Dallas, had it all spread out on a big table, and I had a pad, and I would write the dates down. When this happened, when this happened, when this happened. And then it's like looking at a search warrant affidavit when we used to look at it, try to figure out if something's wrong. And you look at it and look at it, and I said, holy moly, they are one day too late filing the indictment. And I woke Dick up. I called him at home at 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock in the morning and said, can you believe this? Can you believe this? And we filed a motion to dismiss, and Judge Brown granted it. And they took it up to the Fifth Circuit and got a verdict. Just a fascinating case. Just a fascinating case. So, and then there's been some others. We did a long trial in 2009 out in San Diego involving the internet pharmacy case, and tried that to a hung jury, and then another dogged effort there by actually the young lawyer who gets credit for that is David Metters in our office. We were going back through in preparation for the retrial of documents, and stuck in a piece of paper, he found a FedEx receipt document. And you get to looking at it, and it was a FedEx receipt document where the FBI had FedExed a huge number of computer servers from Cyprus to San Diego. And the significance of that is during the entire trial, which went 4 months, the government filed papers and testified under oath that they never had those servers. We couldn't show them to you because we don't have them. And sure enough, they did. And then they came. So we filed a motion to look at them, and then they said, "Well, you can't look at them because there's nothing on them." And I hired a forensic guy to come out, and they were full of stuff. And the government got caught lying significantly. We pled to a misdemeanor and took our tools and went home. So that's some of the significant stuff.
Talk about Phil and the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association and what that association has meant to you.
Okay. Phil was a charter member of TCDLA, past president. Phil, along with and there's a picture that is out there with all of the charter members, and well, those were all my heroes, everybody there. But as soon as I came to his office and began to work with him, he first said, "You got to join. This is it." And so on April 11th, 1974, I got a certificate signed by Phil Burleson, who was the president at the time, and Joe Keekins, Miss Keekins. She was secretary at the time, and became a member. And that is another opportunity that I wouldn't have had if I had not associated with Phil, because I got to meet the giants of our profession, of this organization. I got to work for over 20-something years on the executive, not as a president. I did not get in the officer chain, on the board of directors and the executive committee. But the main thing back then, what was so good, is I got to meet the great lawyers that we have here, Scrappy Holmes and V. Perini and Bob Maloney, and I won't know all the names. And I met them, and we got in cars, and we drove to lofts. You were on some of those trips, I remember. And you walked in, we were trying to build membership, and we'd walk in, and we had laid an application down and said, at the end, it's like $25 or whatever, $40. We're not leaving till you become a member of TCDLA. So here's Phil Burleson and Stan Brown from Lubbock, and me and Scrappy Holmes standing from some kid in Tyler. He's going to pay. He's going to join. So it was just that camaraderie and that commitment to defense work and to people and doing it right. It's meant everything to me, and so I've been active in it. Other than I did, and I taught. I was, like the people who co-chair seminars and put programs together, both there and at the state bar. did that work, and it means a lot. It's giving back to the profession. The one thing I wish I had done, but I'm not second guessing all, I just haven't been able to stay as active in it as I could.
You've also done some state bar work recently, and you've, for those that don't know, you were also at one time, you were president of the Dallas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association.
Right.
So you have had some leadership roles in defense organizations, and I think you've most recently been working on the criminal charge book for the state bar of Texas.
That's correct. I'm on that committee. Buck Files, a member of our organization, appointed me to it, and it's the standing committee to write criminal jury instructions. And it's just a hard working group. George Dix chairs it up, and George does a great job, and it's just very rewarding. I was president of the Dallas County Criminal Bar Association. I was chairman of the jurisprudence committee for the Dallas Bar, active in those kind of things. Yes.
From someone who has known you for quite a while, I know that there are two passions in your life. The quick story I will tell is you did have a medical emergency at one point in time. And when we went and your lovely wife was sitting outside in the room worried about you because you were having this medical emergency. And the one story she told me was, of course, the fact that when they filled out the forms, when you went into the hospital and it said list your hobbies, the hobby you listed was work. So that is always a story that Jeannie and I have shared. But I want to. I've always known you've had two passions. One for your clients and making sure that the system worked for them, and secondly, you spend a lot of time and dedication for your wife and grandkids and your children. So talk a little bit about that.
I do. They are the blessing in my life. Mary and Jeannie was the best thing that could ever happen to me. And we have together a family of 5 children, 1 son and 4 daughters, and 11 grandchildren. And they are the light of my life. They are why I still do what I do and work what I work, and I want to be proud for them because they have brought such a joy to me and to Jeannie and I. I don't want to tear up about it, but they really are important. I've got, like I said, we got four children. My son Jason and his wife Serena live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they have 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. We have a daughter in California, Laura. She's got 2 boys, and one is a junior in UW, sophomore in UW, University of Washington in Seattle. I'm trying to get some guidance here. And Mikey is 11 years old in Southern California. Daughter Shannon lives in Southern California too, and her daughter is in school in Corpus Christi, University of Texas A&M Corpus Christi. So she's a little bit closer to us. And then we've got Cindy Marcus. She is in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, and she has 3 boys. 2 of them are in the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. The other one is getting ready to graduate in another year after from Morgan Ridge High School. And then a daughter, Joni, that lives in Frisco, Texas, and close to us. And she has 2 little redheaded boys. Have I remembered all of them, Darn?
Well, that shows the great organization and memory that you use that you bring to your clients.
And like I said, my wife has brought such joy to our family and to me personally in helping us do these things. It makes me keep working and keep trying to be good for them.
Well, welcome to a very exclusive club. It is a great honor to welcome you aboard.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, a great lawyer like you.